What happens when someone tells you the perfect lie in court and the judge already knows the truth? Sir, you're telling me you had no idea this was a handicapped parking space? Judge Frank Caprio's voice cut through the courtroom air like a blade. The defendant's confident smirk froze instantly. He had no idea that Judge Caprio had already seen the security footage. What happened next would expose not just one lie, but an entire web of deception that shocked everyone in that Providence courtroom. It was a typical Tuesday morning in Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom. Traffic violations, parking tickets, the usual parade of excuses and explanations. But when Michael Thompson walked to the defendant's table, something felt different. He carried himself with the arrogance of someone who believed he was smarter than everyone in the room. Thompson was fighting a handicapped parking violation. A simple $150 fine that most people would just pay. But not Thompson. He had a plan, a perfectly crafted story that he was certain would get him off the hook. Your Honor, Thompson began with rehearsed confidence, I had absolutely no idea that was a handicapped space. The sign was completely blocked by snow, and there were no ground markings visible whatsoever. But what Thompson didn't know was that Judge Caprio had already spent his morning reviewing something that would destroy every word of his carefully planned defense. Judge Caprio listened patiently, his experienced eyes studying the defendant. After 40 years on the bench, he had heard every excuse, every fabrication, every creative interpretation of the truth. But this case was different. This time, he had evidence. Mr. Thompson, Judge Caprio said calmly, you're absolutely certain that the handicapped sign was not visible? Absolutely, Your Honor. I'm a law-abiding citizen. I would never intentionally park in a handicapped space. The snow completely covered everything. Thompson's voice carried the perfect tone of injured innocence. He had practiced this story, refined it, made it bulletproof. Or so he thought. Judge Caprio opened a folder on his desk. What was inside would change everything. Mr. Thompson, before we proceed, I want to make sure I understand your testimony correctly. You're telling this court, can you tell me what the weather was like that day? Thompson sensed an opportunity to elaborate on his story. Terrible, Your Honor. Heavy snowfall, poor visibility. It was one of the worst winter days we'd had. Nobody in that courtroom was prepared for what Judge Caprio revealed next. Judge Caprio reached for his computer monitor and turned it toward the defendant. Mr. Thompson, I'd like you to take a look at this security footage from the parking lot on the day in question. The blood drained from Thompson's face. He hadn't counted on cameras. His carefully constructed story was about to crumble in real time. Subscribe now and comment what you think about this confrontation, because what you're about to see will completely change how you view justice in America. The footage began to play. Crystal clear video showing Thompson walking across a completely dry parking lot on a sunny day. No snow. No storm. No weather conditions that could possibly obscure anything. But that wasn't the most damaging part. The video clearly showed Thompson walking directly past the handicapped sign, stopping to read it, looking around to see if anyone was watching, and then deliberately parking in the handicapped space anyway. The courtroom fell into absolute silence as everyone watched Thompson's lie unravel in high definition. Mr. Thompson, Judge Caprio's voice was steady but carried the weight of moral authority, would you like to revise your testimony about the weather conditions that day? Thompson's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The confident man who had walked into the courtroom was gone, replaced by someone who had been caught in an undeniable lie. Your Honor. I think I may have been confused about the date. Mr. Thompson, Judge Caprio interrupted, let me ask you something else. In this video, we can see you stop and read the sign. What exactly were you reading if it was covered by snow? But the devastating revelation was just beginning. Judge Caprio had discovered something else that would expose the true character of this defendant. Mr. Thompson, before you answer that question, I want you to know that I've also reviewed your parking history with the city. Would you like to guess how many times you've been cited for parking in handicapped spaces? Thompson's face went white. He realized this wasn't just about one ticket anymore. His entire pattern of behavior was being exposed. I'm not sure, Your Honor. 7 times, Mr. Thompson. 7 times in the past 2 years. And according to these records, you've appeared in court before claiming weather-related visibility issues on 3 separate occasions. The courtroom erupted in whispers as people realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Judge Caprio continued, Mr. Thompson, I've been on this bench for 4 decades. I've seen people make mistakes, I've seen people struggle with circumstances beyond their control, and I've shown compassion to thousands who deserved it. But what I cannot and will not tolerate is someone who looks me in the eye and lies while under oath. Thompson finally realized the magnitude of his situation. Your Honor, I want to apologize. Mr. Thompson, Judge Caprio's voice cut through the courtroom, let me tell you what troubles me most about this case. It's not just that you lied to me today. It's that you clearly have a pattern of targeting spaces reserved for people with disabilities, and then you compound that cruelty by lying about it in court. But Judge Caprio wasn't finished. His next words would deliver the most powerful lesson about justice and human decency ever captured in a courtroom. Mr. Thompson, do you know what a handicapped parking space represents? It represents society's commitment to ensuring that people with disabilities can participate in daily life with dignity. When you repeatedly abuse these spaces, you're not just breaking a parking law. You're attacking some of the most vulnerable members of our community. The judge's words carried decades of wisdom and moral authority. Everyone in the courtroom understood they were witnessing something profound. And when you come into my courtroom and lie about it under oath, you're not just disrespecting me or this court. You're disrespecting every person who truly needs those spaces and every citizen who expects honesty from their fellow community members. Thompson was visibly shaking. The weight of his actions, presented so clearly and powerfully, had finally broken through his defenses. Judge Caprio then delivered the verdict that would be remembered long after that day. Mr. Thompson, I'm finding you guilty of the parking violation. But more importantly, I'm finding you guilty of perjury for lying under oath in my courtroom. The original fine was $150. I'm increasing it to $1,500, and I'm ordering you to perform 40 hours of community service at the Disability Advocacy Center downtown. The courtroom was stunned. In a few minutes, Judge Caprio had transformed a simple parking ticket into a powerful lesson about honesty, respect, and human dignity. But Mr. Thompson, Judge Caprio continued, I want you to understand something. This isn't just about punishment. This is about education. I want you to spend those 40 hours learning about the people whose spaces you've been stealing. I want you to understand what accessibility means to someone who truly needs it. Nobody expected what happened next. Thompson, completely broken by the weight of his exposed lies and the judge's moral clarity, began to cry. Your Honor, I never thought about it that way. I just saw empty spaces and thought. Mr. Thompson, Judge Caprio's voice softened slightly, that's exactly the problem. You didn't think. You didn't consider the people those spaces serve. You didn't consider the impact of your actions. And when confronted with the consequences, your first instinct was to lie. But Judge Caprio had one more lesson to deliver, one that would resonate far beyond that courtroom. Let me tell you something, Mr. Thompson, and I want everyone in this courtroom to hear this clearly. Character is not about being perfect. Character is about taking responsibility when you're not perfect. Today, you had multiple opportunities to show character. You could have admitted your mistake, apologized, and learned from it. Instead, you chose deception. The silence in the courtroom was profound. Everyone understood they were witnessing a masterclass in justice. But here's what I want you to remember, Mr. Thompson. It's not too late to show character now. You can leave this courtroom bitter and angry at being caught, or you can leave this courtroom committed to being better. The choice is yours. What Thompson said next surprised everyone, including Judge Caprio. Your Honor, Thompson said, his voice barely above a whisper, "You're absolutely right. I came here planning to lie my way out of a ticket, and you've shown me that I've been lying to myself about what kind of person I am. I accept your judgment, and I promise you that those 40 hours will change how I see the world." Judge Caprio studied the defendant for a long moment. "Mr. Thompson, if you truly mean that, then maybe some good can come from this unfortunate situation. But understand this, actions matter more than words. Show me through your behavior, not your promises." The impact of this case extended far beyond one man's lies. Court officers later reported that in the weeks following Thompson's case, handicapped parking violations in Providence dropped by 60%. The video of the confrontation, posted on the court's social media, had been viewed over 2 million times. More importantly, the Disability Advocacy Center where Thompson was ordered to serve reported a 300% increase in volunteers after the video went viral. People had been inspired by Judge Caprio's passionate defense of accessibility rights. 6 months later, something remarkable happened. Thompson returned to Judge Caprio's courtroom. Not as a defendant, but as a witness in another handicapped parking case. He testified about his own experience and the impact of his community service. "Your Honor," Thompson told the court, "6 months ago, you gave me the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. You gave me the chance to see what I had become and the opportunity to become something better." Judge Caprio listened as Thompson described his volunteer work, his new understanding of disability rights, and his commitment to advocacy. Do you think Judge Caprio was too harsh or exactly right? Share this video if you believe in accountability and second chances, because the message of this case applies to all of us. "Mr. Thompson," Judge Caprio said, "you've proven that people can change when they're held accountable with both firmness and compassion. You've shown that sometimes the most difficult moments in our lives can become the most transformative." The lesson had come full circle. A man who had lied under oath had become an advocate for truth and accessibility. A simple parking violation had become a story of redemption and growth. The legacy of that day in Judge Caprio's courtroom continues to inspire. Legal experts credit Judge Caprio's handling of the Thompson case as a perfect example of restorative justice. Rather than simply punishing the crime, he had addressed its root causes and created an opportunity for genuine rehabilitation. Law schools now use the case as a teaching tool for judges about balancing accountability with compassion. The video has been translated into 12 languages and is used in ethics courses around the world. But perhaps the most important legacy is the simplest one. In a world where truth often seems optional and accountability rare, Judge Frank Caprio showed that justice is not just about punishment. It's about helping people become better versions of themselves while protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Michael Thompson learned that lies have consequences, but he also learned that truth has power. He discovered that character is not about never making mistakes, but about how we respond when our mistakes are exposed. And everyone who witnessed that confrontation learned that sometimes the most powerful moments happen when someone in authority chooses to combine absolute honesty with genuine compassion. The exact moment Frank Caprio exposed a man's secret lies became something much more important, the moment a lie was transformed into truth, punishment into education, and shame into redemption. 3 years later, the ripple effects of that single courtroom moment continued to transform lives across America. The Thompson case had become legendary in legal circles. Law professors at Harvard, Yale, and Stanford used the video as a cornerstone of their judicial ethics courses. Students studied Judge Caprio's technique, how he had methodically dismantled a lie without losing his temper, how he had turned punishment into education, and how he had opened a door to redemption. Professor Sarah Mitchell at Columbia Law School explained to her students, Judge Caprio demonstrated that justice is not just about applying the law mechanically. It's about understanding human nature, recognizing patterns of behavior, and using the authority of the court to create positive change rather than just punishment. Meanwhile, Michael Thompson had become an unlikely advocate for judicial reform. Thompson now traveled the country speaking at law enforcement conferences about the power of restorative justice. His message was simple but profound: Judge Caprio didn't just catch me lying. He showed me why I was lying to myself. At a conference in Chicago, Thompson addressed a room full of judges and prosecutors. "I came into that courtroom thinking I was smarter than everyone else. I left understanding that intelligence without character is just sophisticated stupidity." The Disability Advocacy Center where Thompson had served his community service had experienced a transformation. Director Margaret Walsh reported that their volunteer base had grown from 12 regular volunteers to over 300. The Thompson case opened people's eyes to accessibility issues they had never considered before, she explained. More importantly, the center had documented a 70% decrease in handicapped parking violations across the city. People started seeing those spaces differently, Walsh noted. They began understanding that accessibility isn't just about convenience, it's about human dignity. But perhaps the most remarkable development was happening in courtrooms across the nation. Judges from Maine to California began implementing what became known as the Caprio method, an approach that combined firm accountability with educational opportunities. Instead of simply imposing fines, judges started requiring community service that directly related to the offense. Judge Maria Rodriguez in Texas began requiring texting while driving offenders to volunteer at rehabilitation centers for accident victims. Judge David Chen in California started sending vandalism defendants to work with community beautification projects. Judge Patricia Williams in Florida required DUI offenders to speak at high schools about the consequences of impaired driving. The results were statistically remarkable. A study conducted by the American Bar Association found that recidivism rates dropped by 45% in jurisdictions that implemented restorative justice programs inspired by the Thompson case. More significantly, 78% of offenders who completed these programs reported that the experience had fundamentally changed how they see their responsibility to the community. In Providence, Judge Caprio's courtroom had become a pilgrimage site for legal professionals. Observers from around the world came to witness his methods firsthand. Japanese judicial delegates studied his compassionate but firm approach. European legal scholars documented his techniques for balancing accountability with rehabilitation. Judge Caprio has redefined what it means to be a judge in the 21st century, wrote Dr. James Patterson in the International Journal of Restorative Justice. He's shown that courtrooms can be places of transformation rather than just punishment. The impact on Judge Caprio himself was equally profound. In interviews, the veteran judge reflected on how the Thompson case had crystallized his judicial philosophy. "I realized that day that my job isn't just to apply the law," he explained. "My job is to help people understand why the law exists and how they can be better citizens." The judge had received hundreds of letters from people who had watched the video and been inspired to make changes in their own lives. Parents wrote about using his techniques to teach their children about accountability. Teachers described implementing his approach in their classrooms. Even therapists reported using elements of his method in counseling sessions. 5 years after the original case, Thompson and Judge Caprio reunited for a documentary about judicial reform. "Mr. Thompson," Judge Caprio said during the filming, "you've proven something I've always believed: people are capable of extraordinary growth when they're challenged with both honesty and hope." Thompson's response captured the essence of his transformation. "Your Honor, you didn't just give me a sentence that day. You gave me a chance to become the person I should have been all along." The documentary, titled Truth and Consequences, The Frank Caprio Way, premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival. Legal experts, community leaders, and ordinary citizens who had been touched by restorative justice programs filled the theater. The film's message resonated far beyond the legal community. Film critic Robert Chin wrote, "This isn't just a documentary about one judge or one case. It's an examination of how individual moments of moral courage can create waves of positive change that extend far beyond their original context." Perhaps most importantly, the Thompson case had inspired a new generation of legal professionals. Law school applications for students interested in restorative justice increased by 200% in the years following the viral video. Young lawyers were entering the profession with a different understanding of what justice could accomplish. Jessica Martinez, a recent law school graduate, explained her motivation: "I watched Judge Caprio handle that case when I was still in college. It made me realize that law could be about healing communities, not just punishing individuals. The technology sector had also taken notice. Courts across the country began implementing digital systems that tracked the long-term outcomes of restorative justice sentences. Data showed that offenders who completed community service programs were not only less likely to re-offend, but more likely to become community volunteers and advocates. International recognition followed. The United Nations cited Judge Caprio's methods in their 2028 report on criminal justice reform. The European Union invited him to speak at their conference on restorative justice. Countries from Australia to Norway began pilot programs based on his techniques. But for all the accolades and recognition, Judge Caprio remained focused on the fundamental principle that had guided him throughout his career. Justice without compassion is cruelty, he often said. But compassion without accountability is not justice at all. The key is finding the balance that helps people grow rather than just punishing them for who they were. The Thompson case had become more than a viral video or a teaching tool. It had become a symbol of what American justice could be when it focused on transformation rather than just retribution. It showed that even in an age of polarization and cynicism, there was still room for hope, growth, and redemption. And it all started with one simple question: "Sir, you're telling me you had no idea this was a handicapped parking space?" That question had exposed a lie, but more importantly, it had revealed a truth, that justice is most powerful when it changes hearts along with behavior. That accountability is most effective when it's paired with opportunity for growth. And that sometimes the most important verdict a judge can deliver is not guilty or not guilty, but the verdict that says, you can be better than this. The exact moment Frank Caprio exposed a man's secret lies had become the moment that proved justice, when done right, can transform not just individuals but entire communities. And that transformation continues today, one case, one person, one moment of truth at a time.